No pressure, right? You know, first Joanna and then Kenny and Kate, and I feel like I'm destined to disappoint today because who can live up to that? Particularly because I've also been a bit anxious about this one. I've been to Bioneers many times over the decades, actually, with Atherton Martin fighting a copper mine in Dominica in the 90s so that they didn't dump tailings in that whale breeding ground we heard about on the first day of this fantastic conference. I was here railing against a gold mine in Indonesia that had me arrested and interrogated and deported from Papua then, and more recently I talked about Ken Saro-Wiwa and his son, Ken Wiwa Jr., two of the heroes of the struggle against Shell and the movement for the survival of the Ogoni people in Nigeria. And today I'm going to talk to you about the mines we need to build and the stuff we need to do to get through the energy transition that we've begun this century and the hard work and hard choices that we've got to make this decade about some tough things, including maybe some holes in the ground that need to be built, because we have to finish the job we've begun to drive the solutions of climate change. The good news is, if we do it with the sort of approach in our hearts and heads that Joanna was describing, we can create a civilization just a decade or two hence, which can actually live sustainably on this wonderful spaceship Earth forever. And that's the prospect that we have to build this decade. This is the time. We are the generation. We always knew that, and now is the time to build. But before I tell you the sort of how I see that happening and the who is doing it now, the incredible sheroes and heroes of entrepreneurs and startups that I'll come to, and the indigenous leaders that we see springing up all around the world, really changing the energy pathway we're on, I want to remind you how far we've come this century from what was a lock with the infinite foolery, I call it, of fossil fuels, by which I sometimes say infinite fuckery, actually, because they did damage for 200 years from extraction through pollution, and it was never going to end. There was no plan to stop that. It was literally infinite, and what we're moving into is a finite impact of new energy solutions that we can bring to bear this decade in our economy. We were locked in by the turn of the century, with China in particular having just begun to get its coal out of the ground to be the factory for the world, as well as to bring hundreds of millions of humans into electricity services like we take for granted in places like the US. India trying to do the same. But we realized that we had a problem, Houston. We had to decarbonize this system of electricity and mobility services that we've become dependent on in the 20th century. And we were wondering, pretty legitimately, to be honest, at the turn of the century, which technology set would we depend on for our civilization going forward? Would it be fossil fuels with carbon capture and storage? No, that's bullshit, as it turns out. Would it be a nuclear renaissance? No, it's not going to be that. Would it be wet renewables, wave power, and maybe hydro done better, run a river or something or other? As it's emerged, as the market has had its head, it's become clear we're going to be a solar-powered civilization. And the big nuclear reactor in the sky does plenty of good work, shining its lights on us every day, and we can capture it through photovoltaics and wind turbines, which the wind is transferring the heat on the Earth around. And the reason it's won the race, the question of which technology would be the winner, is simply cost. It's the lowest way to produce electricity ever in the history of the world, and we're seeing that now. And in 2014, we hit a point we call grid parity, when our electricity was cheaper than anyone else's electricity. And the thing is, the more we do it, the cheaper it gets. It's called a technology curve versus a resource curve, where a finite thing gets more expensive because it's scarce the more you use it. This stuff's getting cheaper the more we build it. Of course, there was the problem of when the wind don't shine and the sun don't, when the wind don't blow and the sun don't shine. You know the story. We had to fix for that, and so we leant into the periodic table and we did some green chemistry, and we came up with the highest energy atoms that we could in lithium, a technology we'd commercialized in the 1970s for our Walkmans and made better through our personal electronics boom in the noughties. And we started putting them in cars and then on the grid. And so we solved for the problem of storage of all this abundant sunshine that comes to Earth, and we can transition into electricity with these batteries that we're now making at speed and scale. And, you know, thanks to the Chinese, really, for doing that. In 2017, there was a moment where the startup BYD made the fleet of taxis and buses in the city of Shenzhen of 20 million people go electric in 1 year. And that kind of proved that batteries on wheels could store all the sunshine that they were producing in the nearby electricity markets and go from dirty to clean. And so here we are in the 2020s, as Leah Stokes put it so well yesterday, we're on electric boogaloo. We've got to just electrify everything. There's 1 billion machines here in the States that have to be switched over from thermal system to electric, and 10 billion systems around the world. So that's the story so far. And it's left us in a pretty amazing place where we actually have kind of killed old King Coal. I mean, they're not dead yet, and there might be a few zombie years of dead man walking still, but they've peaked and come down. I mean, the UK, the home of the Industrial Revolution, is even more significant, with less coal in their system than ever prior to the Industrial Revolution. We've also seen a peak of oil in 2019 and probably gas last year as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So there may be a long plateau of dependency, which we've got to solve for, but we are pushing dirty energy out of our system of electricity generation progressively year on year, even as some of the demand grows because we're electrifying everything and all the cars and stuff are coming online. We are actually winning on this transition. And in places like California, where we're very intentional about this politically and as a community, we're doing even better. We're on a glide path to 2045, 100% renewable and decarbonized economy in the 5th largest economy in the world, which is no small feat. Good on you, and thanks to Fran Pavley and the 2006 Global Warming Solutions Act, which set us on this path, and all the activism and amazing champions. And we've actually bent the curve, people. We've got to give ourselves some credit that we've surprised ourselves by reducing emissions more than we expected them to grow. Year on year, the IEA does these projections, which they're wrong about how much we will continue to pollute the atmosphere. Obviously, there's a tick up since COVID, which is a problem, but the current, as Kim Stanley Robinson said yesterday, is clear here, right? The cross-chop is heavy. It's like the Golden Gate. But the current of history is clear in this energy transition. So, does that mean you can all go home? Forget about it? Obviously not. We're obviously going too slow, and we need to speed this up. California, 2035, not 2045. Come on, people. We've got lots of bad actors in the mix, and I'm going to come back to this, but we've got people trying to obfuscate and muddy the path as we sprint towards the finish line here. We've got to build some new muscles. We really have to do things differently, including build stuff, which we're not too good at as good old liberals and progressives in America. And we've got to go back to the future, really, and the indigenous wisdom and the leadership of communities of color, the people who have been hurt first and worst, those living with the legacies of fossil fuels that are actually leading the way. But before I get to that stuff, I just want to dwell on some of the problems, which is these bad actors. And it's not going to surprise you where this is coming from, but I see two big psyops in the sort of media and messaging war that's out there. One is saying that it's sort of a apples and apples experience, whataboutism, this transition to clean energy is going to do just as much destruction, so don't worry about it, just hang out with fossil fuels. It's sort of false equivalency that the mining required for lithium batteries, for example, is just as bad as fossil fuels. The other is that the startups and the innovators and the disruptors and the community activists and the organizers that are trying to build community wealth through this transition because of the innate justice built into a distributed energy architecture that could be locally owned and democratically controlled, they can't deliver it on time. You've got to depend on the big guys. It's almost like this is a script that's been put into the executive offices of these oil companies over the last few years. They're repeating and repeating this message, partly to spread fear, uncertainty, and doubt, which has been their game for 30, 40 years, but also just in case they want to try to capture the initiative and take the market and do the next century just as they've dominated the last. But let's level set. Let's look at what fossil fuels actually does on this earth. This is the volume of stuff we go through annually in terms of coal, oil, and gas to power our world. It is a frightening thing we do to the world, to the planet, to extract this from it. You can see comparisons to the Burj Khalifa in Abu Dhabi or Dubai. It's a volume which is ridiculous. In terms of tonnage, the mass of stuff is a little bit smaller because it's denser, but this is the annual throughput of stuff we take out of the Earth's crust annually for coal, oil, and gas. The two circles in the bottom of the screen are what the metals required for batteries to store the electricity from an abundant wind and solar overbuilt system would require. It's de minimis in 2020, and even in 2050, towards the end of this transition period, it wouldn't be that significant in terms of footprint. And what's amazing is the fossil fuels are once through the system, whereas the metals can be recycled. Of course, that's a can, and that's the struggle, that's the work we've got to do, but lead-acid batteries, the ubiquitous technology that went alongside the internal combustion engine, are 99% captured and recycled on Earth today. We can do this, we have the technology. Another way to think about this is from your perspective on the demand side. You consume, as an American, a lot of stuff. I mean, these are Australian numbers. I got Sol Griffith to do this slide for me because he's rewiring Australia as well as America. But we take about 5,000 kilograms of fossil fuels per person per annum to run our lifestyles. We use about 500 kilograms of stuff to burn that, turbines, Tonka trucks in mines, whatever it is. And then, of course, those carbon molecules combine with 2 parts oxygen to create stuff in the sky that is the blanket we're layering on the Earth that's causing all the problems, right? So about 22,000 kilograms of stuff for each and every one of you to live like you do. You were running that lifestyle on solar, wind, and batteries. You need about 250 kilograms of stuff. The silicon in the solar cells, the aluminium frame, the metals in the batteries, the carbon fiber in the wind blades, the turbines made out of steel and the towers, 250 kilograms. If we recycled just 75% of that stuff, you'd be less than 100 kilograms per annum per person footprint. And again, it's not per annum, actually, because if we recycle it, it's a circular system using green chemistry and closed-loop technologies. We can do this. Okay, to move on to the other bit of bullshit that they're spreading about us is there's not enough startups to do this work. Well, I say that's not true. I know because I have the privilege of working with 150 amazing folk around the world supporting startups in many countries to get this energy transition done. We support diverse entrepreneurs with justice and equity in, so we get justice and equity out of this transformation. We've had 880 companies come up since I joined the outfit in 2016. We've supported thousands of entrepreneurs, put $50 million into them, and we're trying to redress the gender injustice that's inherent in the energy industry, as well as in the startup scene more generally, with some success, although always more work to do. And we're seeing this upswelling, this Cambrian explosion of this opportunity that is actually happening in real time in the world. And I have so many stories to tell you of companies that I just don't have time, but just one to attack the point about battery metals. I found in Perth suburbs in Western Australia in January this amazing outfit of metallurgists that are using an alkaline, non-toxic process, green chemistry like we heard about yesterday, to remove all of the metals, over 95% of the metals from shredded power walls and EV packs. That's cobalt in that little jar without any residues. They get to do a full closed loop or 99% closed loop. And we gave them a prize last Thursday night, $10,000 to the CEO to just get this company further down the line. But yes, Luann Atkinson deserves your applause. It is possible. Okay, moving right along. The other thing we're going to have to do is new muscles to get along this race, because we talk a lot about the United States of America and Europe and the West, but we are flat in energy demand and even down, whereas non-OECD countries is where energy demand growth is happening, and therefore emissions will come unless we switch the energy transition focus there. The good news is China is leading remarkably in this race and doing ungodly things like 50 gigawatts of solar just on rooftops. This is like building 15 nuclear power plants in a 12-month period just last year. And so we've got to give it up to them. I'm not naive to the fact that China has problems, and you know, we know about the human rights issues in Xinjiang. We know they're building coal like nobody else either, but they are building wind and solar and EVs and batteries, and we've chosen to engage with that and partner with that and not do this chest-beating, saber-rattling bullshit in trade wars which become cold wars, which become hot wars. We need to collaborate with everyone to get this puzzle solved. The good news is India, the other giant population and country and democracy is moving down this path too with their national solar mission. Just like 5 years ago, India was being talked about as this ticking time bomb on climate because they're going to get electricity for all their people, and now they're doing it with solar and wind at a scale and speed which is almost hard to imagine. And that is spilling over into their mobility markets, where vehicle miles traveled in India are mostly on 2- and 3-wheel vehicles. You know, think the rickshaws in Delhi or the mopeds in Mumbai. 85% of people get around that way. And that is all electrifying because this low-cost, abundant electricity is spilling out of the system and charging batteries all over the market. And that is actually destroying demand for oil in the world. Like millions of barrels a day is actually being reduced from global demand by the electrification of mobility. And we're seeing this everywhere. In Indonesia, we've got a company in our portfolio that's doing it for hot swappable batteries for the two-wheelers there. We've got a company that actually came up in Berkeley, California called Power Hive that is taking boda-bodas electric in East Africa. Boda-bodas are like the taxis in Kenya that they've got hot swappable battery platforms for. And we're even going to see this spill over into the next market, which is marine transportation. When you think about it, tens and hundreds of millions of humans move around rivers and coasts in little putt-putt boats with shitty, expensive, fossil fuel-based technologies. So here's an amazing video from Bali last July where I met one of the champions of that transition. So if you want to get out on a fishing boat in Bali, you can either go with Azura technology, which is all electric, like that, with this battery pack and electric motor, or a shitty old clunker like that, which costs about 25 times as much to run over the life of the system. 60% saving on every trip, straight up the bat. Okay, so I've only got a minute and a half left. I'm going to ask for some grace of a minute or two. I get it that we've got some excitement in the audience. We've got to electrify everything everywhere all at once, with apologies to Kate and Michelle Yao. But it's really hard. The lift we have to do this decade, we're less than half of our economy electric right now, and that's a big lift. And here in America, we've forgotten how to do hard things to some degree. You know, right now there's a backlog in the build out of the renewable system, which is just the start. If you remember Leah Stokes' formula, we've got to build renewables and then we have to electrify all the things. We've built a lot of renewables that we can't interconnect to the grid because of transmission delays and pipelines and things. I mean, The Economist this week, not a magazine I normally like, has a person hugging a transmission tower because that's kind of what some of the things we need to do. Where we are seeing leadership for this in the States, I could talk about, you know, the amazing people in Standing Rock that are standing up wind farms as well, or the UROC up in Northern California that have built out the resilience microgrid at Blue Lake Rancheria and are helping the offshore wind industry grow out of Humboldt Bay. But we've supported startups in Navajo, which are just doing incredible things, leveraging the reality that as coal crashed during the Trump years there, they were left with these stranded assets of high voltage transmission cables to Vegas, Phoenix, and LA, and they've decided to build community wealth by building massive solar projects on their own country, owned and led by Navajo people themselves, which will sell electricity to market. And along the way, they've built Navajo Power Home, which is actually electrifying the 15,000 families on the reservation that were left without electricity at the end of the 20th century, which is a disgusting shame on America's record. But another live example of this that I want to invite you to come and discuss this afternoon at 3 down at the Freight and Salvage is the very real prospect of a green lithium industry here in California. We have the largest potential resource for lithium in America coming out of the geothermal power sector in Imperial County. We produce hot water to the surface to get steam. That water has salt in it, including lithium salts. We've just this year started commercially producing that lithium salt. The prospect is for an enormous supply chain of battery making to happen in the inland counties of Southern California. This is a delegation that was down there on March 20th. The guy in the hat and the glasses in the back row is Gavin Newsom. But the real leader in this picture is the man in front of him, Thomas Tortes, the chairman of the Torres Martinez, who are the tribe amongst the Cahuilla Indians, the bands that are owners of that land below the Salton Sea and all around it. And they want to host an eco-industrial precinct of a kind that could demonstrate by doing this prospect of green chemistry done right, getting this lithium out of the water in order to have the electrification of everything that we need to beat climate change in time. So I invite you to come and talk with us this afternoon. We've got the Economic Director of the Torres Martinez, Jesus Arguelles, with us, and a couple of staff from Imperial County. But if you're not able to come to that, if you're a donor or investor, you want to get behind New Energy Nexus, please do. If you are an entrepreneur, we love you, all power to you. Get online, get in our Slack community, get our newsletter, because we can probably help you. And finally, for all of you, just know that now is the moment. The 2020s is the decade we knew was going to be the turning point, the inflection. We are on the path. We must stay the course. Do not get distracted. This is the time to build. These are the charging 20s, the time that history will look back upon, in which we built the solar-powered civilization we all yearn for. Shine on.